I saw so many people who were just paralyzed by their incapacity to be sure of what was going to happen next.
And I am certain that every leader I speak to, especially senior leaders, are saying to their organization, I want you to get more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, as if that solved the problem. So that sounds great. But the real truth is, what the heck are you supposed to do?
I saw this in CEOs, I saw it on boards, I saw it in my MBA students. It was everywhere. These people were absolutely brilliant. They managed uncertainty all the time. Nobody knows when they start a book or a piece of music, either where it's going to go or what the world will think of it. The first thing is you don't have to know everything to start. I think this is a huge mental block in people's minds. All throughout your life, just become as observant as humanly possible. Become an excellent noticer. Things just happen in life. Sit with it, but don't ignore it. So I'm not saying, oh, just ignore it and see what happens. I'm saying, well, keep thinking about it. Keep asking yourself.
There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation today. So uncertainty, that's the topic we're going to talk about. I think it's at an all-time high. I think it's been high for a while. And I am certain that every leader I speak to, especially senior leaders, are saying to their organization, I want you to get more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, as if that solved the problem. So that sounds great. But the real truth is, what the heck are you supposed to do to get comfortable with uncertainty? Let's also be clear that some of us personality-wise are more comfortable with not knowing, and some of us really desperately need to know more details in order to be comfortable. So, if you think about it, you have to ask, who is it in the world that manages uncertainty, not knowing, experimenting better than anybody else? And the argument for today is that has to do with artists. So the question is, what can we learn from artists about what to do? So my guest, Dr. Margaret Heffernan, is uniquely qualified, I'm going to argue on this one. Background by way of Margaret is that she produced programs for the BBC in the UK for 13 years. And then moved to the U.S. to spearhead a number of multimedia productions for a variety of companies like Intuit and The Learning Company and Standard & Poor's. And then she was chief executive for several startup companies named Top 25, one of them by Streaming Media, and she was named as the top 100 media executives by Hollywood Reporter. As if that's not enough, we have 6 books. One of my all-time favorite books that I recommend to everybody is called Willful Blindness: Why We Ignore the Obvious at Our Peril. Definitely worth reading. There are others that have won numerous prizes, but the ones that we're talking about today is Embracing Uncertainty. So, Margaret, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much. It's great to spend some time with you, Wanda.
Always lovely to spend time with you and to hear your perspective. And I'm going to start where I always start. Why? Why did you write on this? You certainly have a number of wonderful books, several on uncertainty and change. Why this topic at this time?
Well, my previous book was really looking at the failure of forecasting and how that means we are left with uncertainty. And I looked at various ways in which specifically companies and organizations of various kinds deal with that. And after that book came out, really pretty much at the very beginning of the pandemic, which everybody said was my brilliant forecasting, but was actually just, for the world, bad luck, but for the book, good luck. I still kept thinking about, but what about us? What about us as individuals? How do we deal with this? And I thought about that largely because I saw so many people who were just who were just paralyzed by their incapacity to be sure of what was going to happen next. I saw this in CEOs, I saw it on boards, I saw it in my MBA students that I teach at the university. So it wasn't a particular function of seniority or age or status or achievement. It was everywhere. And, as you said in your introduction, I started off working in the media business and I worked with a lot of artists, primarily playwrights, poets, directors, visual artists, musicians. And I thought, these people were absolutely brilliant in two respects. One is they managed uncertainty all the time. It was in the nature of their professional lives that their careers are uncertain. Nobody knows when they start a book or a piece of music, either where it's going to go or what the world will think of it. But they also had a characteristic which I had marveled at really ever since I started working, particularly in television, which is, it takes a long time to make a TV program, usually from the idea to it going out, maybe 2 or 3 years. And yet there were a whole bunch of people I knew who always seemed to make programs that came out just when the world needed them. And I thought, how could they know that? How could they sense sort of what was going on out there before anybody could even see it? Where did that instinct, where did that intuition come from? And then just by a sort of fluke, I had a fantastic conversation with Andy Haldane, who was the chief economist at the Bank of England. And he happened to mention to me that when he had a really big decision to make about the economy, he would go for long walks and just look around and think, what's going on? What's the mood? How are people feeling? He'd do this in the city of London, which is where the financial center is, but it's also where lots and lots of people live. There's schools there and so on. So something about him was thinking, I need to be out in the world to play through imaginatively the choices that I'm making and get some sense of what kind of seems to make sense and what doesn't. And anyway, the more I kept thinking about this, the more I really thought there's a lot more to be said here. And initially, I did this as 5 essays for BBC Radio. And those were picked up by a publisher who said, I heard these, I thought they were fantastic, I think they'd make a great book. And I was really delighted because I thought that when I was writing them. But, I kind of tend to finish a project and move on. But that somebody had the same thought. I thought, actually, I would really like to do this. And I'll have more time to do it. And I'll get to interview more artists than the ones I already know about. And that'll be fun. So that's the genesis of the project. And I have to say, it doesn't sound terribly serious, although for me it is serious. The notion that I was going to spend months interviewing artists was just so deeply appealing. I couldn't resist.
Perfect. I do think, well, I certainly hear this advice all the time, that from senior leaders, the need to create space in the diary to pull back, to elevate, and to think. In fact, if there is a single thing that I find people at upper mid ranks are missing to kind of break through, it's that ability to elevate themselves and see how this fits in a whole pattern. And that's what you're saying. But to do that, I got to engage that with I don't necessarily know the answer. I can't come at it with an approach of uncertainty. And I think that's where you're headed with on this one.
I think that's right. I think that, we feel, people in leadership positions feel such a compulsion to be certain. And they quite rightly feel from the people around them a desire to be given certainty. That this is one of the most difficult aspects of leadership, which I think actually people almost never talk about, which is that I, as a leader, feel very uncertain, but I can see that my people want certainty. And on some level, I would really like to give them certainty, except if I have any integrity, I can't, because nobody does know the future. So I think this can be quite painful when you can see all the people around you looking to you for the answer and you can't really see it. And you're also spot on when you say that the best ones have a desire to pull back and reflect. Um, I think sometimes they don't because they're afraid they might not come up with the answer. I think the better ones realize that it isn't actually about coming up with an answer, it's about coming up with an approach, which is if we can accept uncertainty and say, okay, we don't know what's going to happen, that doesn't mean we do nothing. So the question isn't what's the answer, like it's in a secret envelope. The question is, okay, in the light of the fact that we have very little certainty, what should we be doing now? And that's really what the book tries to unpack, is the different mindsets, habits, behaviors that I think allow people to do that really creatively.
Right. Margaret, even in reading the book, I had the feeling that what you are really describing is in some ways what we know makes a resilient person. So facing uncertainty, unknown, disaster, trauma, all sorts of other things. Some of the qualities are the belief that I can do something about it. I can take a step. But it's not trying to find the answer, the solution. It's finding the next step. And that's what you're saying here.
That's exactly right. And it's interesting because when I was writing Uncharted, I'd flirted with all sorts of different titles. And at one point, I flirted with the title, The Path is Made by Walking, which is a quote from a very famous Spanish poem. And I believe that actually in the face of uncertainty, what you have to do is take the first step. And if you've taken the first step, you'll look around, you'll see different things, you'll have different thoughts, you'll take the next step, and you will gradually develop clarity. The way I often talk to my kids about this is if you're in a brand new city and you don't know where to go, and let's imagine for a moment you don't have a phone, right? Then you can't just stand on the street corner and try to figure out the whole city from there. You have to start walking around and eventually you'll figure out pieces of the puzzle. And I think this really is the best way to address uncertainty. But in terms of its relationship to resilience, I think resilience comes from doing. I don't think you start out with resilience and do. I think that you don't know, so you try something. Maybe in my imaginary city, I turn left and walk for a bit and realize I'm quickly getting out of town. So then I turn around and walk the other direction. And I start getting closer, so I become a bit more convinced I might be onto something. So then I feel able to go yet further. And resilience, I think, really derives from doing something. It's okay, so I'll do more. That's still okay. I'll do more. That's not so great, so I'll row back and do something different. I think resilience really is a byproduct of trial and error. And realizing that that is much more energizing than trying to think to the perfect answer. And it's much more energizing than allowing yourself to be paralyzed.
Right. Absolutely. And I think resilience is something we look back on and say, oh, I developed resilience with time. I agree with that. But I don't want to talk about resilience. I want to talk about uncertainty. I don't want to talk about your insights. So let me pivot us away from that topic. And I'm going to ask a grossly unfair question, Margaret.
Okay.
If you were to take the wonderful depth of analysis and stories and so on that are in this book, which I really enjoyed, and just summarize for me, what are the 3-5 key lessons you take away in terms of approaching uncertainty? What would you say are the top 3-5?
Excellent question. The first thing is you don't have to know everything to start. I think this is a huge mental block in people's minds. I see it all the time, that we have to have the whole plan before we can go out the front door. I think in this context, the thing that really bowled me over when I was researching the book were the number of writers, novelists, and primarily people who write kind of thrillers and detective stories, in other words, things that are very plot driven, who start their novels not knowing what the plot is. I mean, that just blew my mind, right? So somebody like Lee Childs, very, very complex plots. Starts with a character or an idea or a place or an image, and then just sees what he'll find. Incredible. Um, Olga Tokarczuk wrote a fantastic kind of murder mystery story called Drive Your Plow Over My Bones. And she said it wasn't until she was two-thirds of the way through it that she realized who'd done it, and it wasn't who she thought it was. So that takes a lot of stamina to just keep going in the confidence that you'll find something, you know. So that's the first thing I'd say is don't think you have to know it all just to get started. The second thing I'd say is all throughout your life, just become as observant as humanly possible. Become an excellent noticer. This is clearly true of visual artists, but it isn't visual artists alone. Dickens was absolutely brilliant at this. Virginia Woolf is brilliant at it. Take your AirPods out of your ears, get off your phone, off of Google Maps, walk around and just clock things and just look. It is astonishing what you'll see when you start to pay attention. Take the bus instead of the subway. You'll see more. Earwig, I'm an inveterate earwigger. Listen to other people's conversations. What are people talking about? What are the billboards about? All this sort of stuff. It is information. It is telling you something. So really be alert, be where you are, and just kind of, I think of it as it's like stocking your food cupboard with just observations. They will eventually kind of bump into each other and develop ideas. Cherish really good questions that people ask you, especially if you can't answer them. I mean, there's some questions, I'm still living with after probably a decade or two. And not because you need to close them down, but because there's something behind them that's going to be very rich for you. So get in the practice of thinking, not with a goal, but just thinking. I had a long train journey to make yesterday, and I was on 3 different kinds of trains. And I sat there thinking, why are these trains all designed in completely different ways? When 2 of them is super comfortable and the other one is super uncomfortable. And I knew it wasn't necessarily older. I thought, what were these designers thinking? They must have been thinking something. They wouldn't willfully have done a bad design. So I was trying to enter into the heads of the engineers to think, what were they driving at here? I don't know. I may never know, but kind of engage with the world that you see. Try to spend time with people that are not like you. I do this sometimes to extremes, and then I'm amazed when I discover it's really tiring. But try to move outside your immediate circle, your immediate generation, your immediate profession. It's really interesting how hard you might find it to start describing what you do because it's obvious to you, but you haven't been able to translate it for other people. So that's incredibly refreshing, seeing yourself through that different lens. And then obviously read, listen to music, go to art galleries. I wrote in the book about a business leadership sort of team event which kicked off in, I think it was Houston, Texas, but it might have been Dallas. I can't remember. It kicked off with these 12, 14 business leaders going to a private view of an exhibition of Jackson Pollock's black paintings, pairing up and sitting in front of them and talking about what ideas the paintings provoked. Now, when this was described to me, I was a speaker on the conference. I thought, oh my God, this will never happen. These guys are just not going to tolerate this. I was so wrong. They loved it. It really provoked fantastic conversations of a kind that I think they couldn't have had any other way. So, start to integrate the arts into your life because they will get you to think differently. I promise.
Fascinating.
I
I
think
know a
that's five.
number of, that's five. That's really good five. You could have made six. It was okay too. I know a number of companies who started to introduce various artistic endeavors like some drama or some art gallery or some orchestra performances or so on for the purposes of looking at specific leadership qualities and so on. Sometimes, though, those are so directed for a specific purpose that you miss the open-endedness of what the art exploration can bring for you. And I think what you're saying is leave it open-ended. As uncomfortable as it is, that is a part of the exploration. Yeah?
I think that's absolutely right. I don't think you should ever use art directively. It's certainly not how artists intend it. And it's when you start to skew art and turn it a little bit into propaganda, which I'm a bit wary of. Again, I wrote in the book about Richard Olivier runs a leadership program based on various Shakespeare plays. The Tempest is one, Henry V is another. And I think what's so very skillful about the way that he does this is that he leaves it to the leaders who participate in these workshops to find for themselves what they need from the plays, rather than him giving them kind of leadership footnotes. It's a very subtle, very elegant process. But the fact that the work is being done by the participants, not by a facilitator who's simply providing, if you like, the setting for this, means that what the participants discover in themselves is very deeply internalized. And it remains very, very fresh and memorable in their minds. And I remember one of them who was working with the Gates Foundation saying, you don't need notes, you don't need PowerPoint presentations, because this is something that has happened to you. It is now part of your life. And so you couldn't possibly forget it, but you'll be in a meeting and suddenly you'll just remember that moment from a scene in the play. And all sorts of possibilities will surface in your mind, and you'll see that no, you don't have just one choice. You have a whole bunch of choices about what you could do here, how you answer someone, how you treat someone. And that deeply experiential learning, I think, is the heart of the matter.
Well, it combines two things that I think are really important. You're right. An experience means I remember it, but there's a deeper reflection. It's not somebody telling me about their interpretation. It's me reflecting on my own experiences and drawing lessons from those experiences in the context of whatever's in front of me. That reflection piece is the part that I find we miss the most in our trainings, sometimes in our coaching. It certainly
Well,
isn't. There isn't space for thinking that deeply.
I think that's right. I mean, I think in general, in everything to do with leadership, mostly what's absent is thinking. Instead of thinking, we have checklists. And I was actually, the event I was doing yesterday was with people in a very large healthcare system. And we had a fantastic conversation about checklists, which on the one hand, make sure you don't miss anything. But on the other hand, they tell you exactly what to look at, right? So they're quite a mixed blessing in the sense that it might be you should look at something that's not on the checklist. So I think we've lived through, I hope we're moving out of it, but I'm probably over optimistic. I think we've lived through an age of kind of management thinking and writing, which is do these five things, be these three characteristics, don't forget this one main concept, all this kind of clutter, mental clutter, which gets in the way of people actually being where they are, actually being attuned to what's my response to what I'm hearing. If I feel stressful, why do I feel stressful? What's the problem? Listening to the internal dialogue in your own mind and being able to address that. And so much management writing and management thinking is so oversimplified that it's kind of taught people not to think. Just what's the rule here? What's the thing I was supposed to remember? Is it about purpose? I can't remember. Is it about the why? It's, all these kind of management slogans and jargon pop into the mind and get in the way of sit down, be quiet, listen to what your brain is trying to tell you. Think about what your options are. Think about who else maybe you want to have a good conversation with. But give your brain time and space to wander. And part of this, I find now, I'll get an email from someone and sometimes, I'll be tired and I'll think, I want to send off a very curt reply. And then I think, no, don't. You're tired. Just step away from the email. And I don't know, I may go for a bike ride or a walk or cook dinner or something. And I'll think, no, actually, the answer to that annoying email is this. It's really simple. You don't need to be annoyed with anybody. We should just do this. And again, it's very well understood that when you look away from problems, your brain starts to use different parts. And so you can see more options. But you have to be disciplined to build in that pause.
Right. To build in that pause and to allow that process without directing it is what I think is so difficult, is to let it emerge. And that means space. And so much of our lives are allergic to empty space. Yet I've got to have some empty space to do this kind of work. The other thing that I was struck with in reading the book and in talking to you is I believe about great leadership that whatever you think is right, I promise you need to look at the polar opposite. Because everything in leadership is a balance between opposite polarities. So this seems like the right response. Just entertain the polar opposite response. Just a little bit, then make your own decision. And you're saying the same thing here. It's just slightly different words.
Well, it's interesting. I do have a very, very strong belief that if somebody poses a question to you where there are only two choices, you definitely shouldn't answer the question because there are always more possibilities than that. And in many ways, the role of leadership is to lead the exploration between those two poles. And that, the minute someone forces you into a binary choice, what they're doing is they're trying to hide all the other options. And it's very hard for me to think these days of anything I'm asked to do where I think actually there's only one, I can only make one, there's only one possible answer. Really.
I agree.
And I think you're absolutely right. Once you say, okay, the binary choice is off the table, there's always got to be at least three, then you really start to investigate what's the nature of the problem and therefore what's the spectrum of possible solutions to it. Yeah. And there may not be solutions. There may just be, to go back to where we started, there may just be that first step. Let's take the first step and find out more.
Find out more data. Right. It strikes me that when I read about innovation or I read about some of our genius folks like Albert Einstein and the way they worked and so on, you were talking about artists, it's the same set of 5 principles. So if I just come back to those, I want to remind you is that you don't know everything to start. You don't need to know everything. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to provide certainty. Just start. That will give you information and you'll know where the next step is from there. 2 is keen observation. So you talk about this in terms of observing in the world. It's amazing what you observe walking around your own organization too, just for the purposes of observing. It's incredible what you can see. All right. I've surprised people by doing that on a couple of occasions inside their organization. 3 is cherish the really good questions, particularly the ones that you don't have an answer to, because it's not the answer, it's what that sparks in your own thinking. Time with people who are not like you, who don't think like you do, who don't do what you do, who are a different world, and then just really engage with arts in general, read, listen to music, to go to galleries, because that opens up the exploration. All right, I want to talk to you about a conundrum I see, which is, I'm probably going to over-exaggerate what you really say just to make my point here, but at any rate, you talk about at times the need to create structure. Like I've got all these random experiences and I need to create structure out of them to have them go somewhere to make something make sense. And sometimes the structures we start with make some sense and we stick with them. And sometimes they don't make sense. So how do I know whether to keep digging deeper and persisting versus to pivot and go in a different direction? Any advice, especially from looking at artists? When do they abandon course and when do they stick with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say a couple of things. First of all, don't make the decision too soon. Sit with it. It may be you're just having a bad day. um, and also things happen, right? Things just happen in life. So sit with it, but don't ignore it. So I'm not saying, oh, just ignore it and see what happens. I'm saying, well, keep thinking about it. Keep asking yourself, why? Why is this? Why am I in this maybe stuck place? And try to understand the nature of the discomfort. Are you impatient? Are you bored? Have you not gone deep enough? So, I mean, I have to say, my response to that is, it surprises people because I'm a very energetic, pretty impatient kind of person. But my response to that when it's about something important is I just wait. I can remember when I stopped running what turned out to be my last tech company. And my husband kept saying to me, what are you going to do next? And he told me later, he kept thinking any day now, Margaret's going to bounce in saying, oh, I've had an idea, Um, and I didn't. I mean, I didn't really do anything for maybe a year. Partly because I was super burned out and I just really needed some recovery time. But I had a very strong feeling that I didn't want to run another business. I wanted to carry on working, but I didn't know what. And various things happened. Somebody said to me, oh, you should write a book about, the beginning of the internet because you had a front row seat there. And I thought, I don't know, maybe it's too early, maybe it's too late. I'm not sure which. But the idea of writing stuck. And then I started having other conversations and I thought, that's funny. People seem to think there are no issues left with, about women and work and career anymore. Like it's all over because we have equal pay. That's weird. Anyway, to cut a long story short, my first book ended up being about the issues that women still confronted at work. This was in 2004 when everybody thought, the whole problem had been solved.
Yeah.
I felt after my second book, which had been about the rise of female entrepreneurship, that I just didn't want to write about women anymore. I'd said everything I had to say, so I needed to find something else to do. So I wrote a big, mammothly researched book on the nature of business resilience, which not a publisher in the world was interested in because it was 2007 and nothing bad was ever going to happen again. We didn't need to be resilient because we'd mastered boom and bust. And of course, then, the whole economy collapsed. But by then I just thought, oh, forget that. And I'd written 2 plays for the BBC about the collapse of Enron, one of which was called willful blindness, because that was a phrase, a legal concept that came up in the trial of Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling. And I got really fascinated by the idea of willful blindness. So what does this long shaggy dog story tell you? It tells you that if it's not clear, you move towards things that are interesting to you and you keep out in the world picking up things and being attentive, and eventually something's going to coalesce. A whole bunch of things will come together, and then that's what you want to do. I mean, I think the next book I'm probably going to write is something I first started researching in about 2010. And it was a super interesting to me, but I couldn't see why anybody would be interested in it except me. But I've still kept kind of, when I have a little bit of downtime, picking at it. And now, because the times are different, now I think maybe I do know how to write it in a way that people will want to read it. But that's not anything it's not, I haven't changed the idea. It's just now it seems relevant in a way that then it didn't.
Right. Or you know how to describe it in a way that's relevant today, either of which can be true.
I
Margaret,
hope so, but I guess
this
the other thing
notion of
I would say is I think this advice of mine really drives people mad. They want a decision, they want a decision, they want a decision. Um, so sometimes you just have to jump. You just, I mean, when somebody asked me to run my first tech company, I'd never run a tech company before. How did I know I could do it? I didn't know I could do it. I thought it was very similar to businesses I'd run in the past. Did I know that? No. There are lots and lots of things, and books are among them, but running businesses are too. There is no way to know if you can do it except to do it. There is no simulation, there is no data for what you can become.
great advice. I love that. No way to know if you can do it other than to just do it. I love it. One of the things that strikes me as I'm listening to you about this, you say things like, if it's an important area, an important decision, and it's an unknown, wait, but move towards interesting things and pay attention. Okay. And eventually something is going to come out of that. There's a lot of confidence in yourself, in the world, in your brain to say, okay, something will eventually happen. All right. Any advice on getting the confidence that something will eventually emerge in a reasonable time frame?
Well, this is going to sound terribly lowbrow, but on some
Go
level,
for
I
it.
think it's sort of simple. Try stuff. Try stuff and see, do you like it? I started my career in news. I didn't like news, but I really liked people who worked in radio. So I went and worked in a different part of radio. I really, really liked that. Um, there's just so much in life. I mean, actually, almost all aspects of life that you can't know till you do it. I mean, it's a bit like dating. You can't look at somebody and read their CV and think, yes, this is the person I'm going to marry and live with for the next 35 years. You go out on dates, right? They're little practice exercises, essentially. And I think that's true of all of life, which is you move towards the things that look interesting. You accept the possibility that you could be wrong. I mean, I once thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to learn how to fly a plane? Well, I had a friend who had a friend who had a glider. I went up in the glider. I thought, there's absolutely no way I want to learn how to do this. This so does not speak to me, But that's okay. And now I'm not going to go to my deathbed thinking, oh, if only I learned how to fly. So I just, try stuff and don't invest too much at the start. Keep an open mind, try stuff and think, okay, so what did that speak to me that was positive, and how much of it was negative, and do I want to keep going, or actually do I need to try something else? And I see this particularly with people between their 20s and their 30s, which is they typically think they know exactly what they want to do. I don't think I've known anybody who turned out to be right. But I'll just take it out of the abstract. A niece who wanted to work in the art market went and worked for a big auction house, really didn't like it, thought then she wanted to become an actor, went to drama school, really didn't like it, then started working in collective bargaining in the developing world, adored it. Who knew? She could never have known that.
Who would go?
you know.
Yeah, right, right.
And I can tell that story about dozens of young people I know. And they feel, and I resent this on their behalf, they feel that somehow they failed because they didn't get it right first time. I think they've been brilliant. They've tried stuff. And so when they land where they really are comfortable, they know it's not just a fluke, and they don't feel regret that they didn't try stuff. They bring so much more to the thing that they've chosen. None of it's wasted.
Right. Because there's all perspectives, all sorts of things that you bring from that. But I think there's a piece of wisdom in there that says don't get too invested in it. That may not mean I need to go get my PhD in art history to only realize that I don't want to work in the art market, for example. I want to try it. And so this is the idea of experimenting. For the record, I interview hundreds of senior executive leaders around the world every year for a variety of reasons. Over many, many decades, or many years, I can say that I know 5 who actually started out in their career and landed where they thought they would land. Like they stayed in that same field.
Yeah, me too.
It's amazing.
Me too.
It just doesn't happen. It's extremely rare. All right, Margaret, there's so much about this book that I find insightful, sometimes difficult to accept, because I think you're right. We do strive for certainty, and business wants us to have certainty. And we look at our teams and we think we're supposed to know. We look up at our managers and think they are supposed to know. But the truth is we can't. Okay? They can't. So don't try to know everything. Just start. Be observant. Notice things around you. Pay attention to really good questions. Talk to people who are very different than you, and use the arts as a way of just opening your mind and exploring, letting your brain think. I don't think we can get any better advice on how to deal with uncertainty.
Well,
so, Margaret, if somebody wanted to reach you,
Sorry, just
go ahead, please.
Finish. I think, this is, the way you put it is so lovely, because it reminded me that this is what Seamus Heaney says the function of poetry is, which is to give us glimpsed alternatives of who we could be. If you're reading a poem or you're watching a play, you're putting yourselves in the shoes of others and kind of trying that on. And I think that's a fantastically productive and creative way to live.
Fascinating. Now makes me want to go run out to the art gallery for this exhibit I've been dying to see. So we'll see it there. I will, for sure. Margaret, if somebody wanted to reach out to be in touch with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
They can go to my website, which is just www.mheffernan.com.
Okay.
If you Google my name, it'll come up top of the list. I'm very, very easy to find.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. What a great conversation. I love the idea that we can lean more into uncertainty. We don't have to resolve everything. And there are some tactics to actually help us on that journey. All right. Thank you, Margaret. It's been a pleasure. Join us next week for another conversation of getting out of your comfort zone. Leave us a note. We'd love to hear from you. Outofthecomfortzone.com. See you next week.